Back early last spring, when Lisa mentioned to me that she was thinking about celebrating the 150th Sesquicentennial Celebration of the rebuilding of the Cathedral, I thought, wow, what a great opportunity to get the Arts Council to do a graphic timeline of what that actually was, so that it isn't just reading a book, but actually experiencing that book, to be able to look and experience the people and the places that were involved in the whole development of St. James as we know it today. So we took several of our monthly meetings with the Arts Council, reading through Rima's book. Everybody in the Arts Council had a copy of the book that we read, and came to the meetings with ideas on the key events that needed to be included, both in the cathedral as well as what was going on in the neighborhood around, in the larger city, and in the world at the same time. Because what goes on in this cathedral is not just an exclusive experience. St. James has always been involved in the working of the city, and involved even in the nation and the administration of the country. So this is, well, I'll talk about that again in just a minute, but that's one of the things that really impacted me. The St. James is not just a small neighborhood church. St. James is and has been very much a part of the local community, the city organization, and even the nation. And I think, if I talk about the things that have really impacted me as I have worked through this, I would have to say, I worship here, but I had no idea the heritage and the legacy of this place. And it happens because of people just like you, who are dedicated and committed to making this place what it is. So I thank you for your part in this, as well as the committee that helped in actually making this experience. One other book that has been really helpful is one that has an older one, actually, even than Rima, the Massey Shepherd book on the history. And I think, Lance, did you digitize this, or are you in the process of digitizing it?
That's one of our projects for the Sesquicentennial.
Okay, good. So one of the projects for the Sesquicentennial, Lance is going to digitize this, and I really recommend that you all take advantage of that. But I just want to read the last chapter before I turn this over to Rima, because I think this last paragraph is kind of important for looking at what St. James is and has been. The book was finished in 1934. It's a history of the first 100 years from 1834 to 1934. St. James Church stands in the heart of one of the most strategic areas of the city. It still does. It has prestige and a valuable investment in property, a century's background of service, and a broad, socially sensitive message. It always has had, as well as having that still today. 100 years is a long time in the life of Midwestern Parish. In that time, St. James rectors and people have built firmly and have built well. The church has a new century with a strong background, with energy and with hope. And I hope at this point that if anything, what you are seeing when you come out of this is a sense of hope for what tomorrow will be for St. James. All right, so enough of me. Newland suggested when we were working at the archives, what you might want to do is to get a hold of Rima Schultz, and I had no idea she was still in the area at this point, and so we did, and I asked her if she would be interested in coming to this forum and talking with us about writing the book, about some of the things she discovered at St. James when she was working on it, and she said she would love to. So I was delighted to say, oh, please come on the day that we introduce the timeline and talk to us about some of those experiences. She wrote the book, The Church and the City, that has been our major research tool for the entire process. But how better to actually experience that book than to be able to talk with the author. So Rima, I'm going to ask you to come up
How did a Jewish woman who was just finishing her doctoral dissertation on the political economy of Chicago from 1833 to 1871 get the contract to write a history of St. James Church, the 150 years of its rather interesting historical relationship with Chicago and with the National Episcopal Church, and how in the Midwest its leadership really began to forge what became the American Episcopal Church. Because in 1833, as you know, it was the Protestant Episcopal Church of the United States of America. So how did it become all of these things? It not only influenced the growth of Chicago, it influenced the growth of its own denomination and had very important roles in the modernization and social structure of the 20th century. So it's an important place, but how did they know who I was? I had not done anything but write my dissertation, and including in my dissertation were the shakers and movers, the people in power, the elites that had built Chicago. They were the businessmen on the frontier, the entrepreneurial frontier, and they were all Episcopalians, or a lot of them. The others were Presbyterians, but we'll excuse that. Okay, so how was the connection made? And that's my first story. It's about risk and vision. And it's the risk and vision of the committee at St. James that reached out and found me and took a risk. Okay, because their vision was they wanted not just an ordinary parish history, they wanted something different, they wanted something special. They wanted something not just about the clergy that were here, but they wanted to know about the social structure of the people who sat in the pews, the women who did the work to make the church function, the people, and the combination of what was going on with the clergy and with the people. So this was going to be a social history, and I was one of the new breed of historians who were doing social history, who were thinking about the bottom up and the top down and the relationship. Okay, well, I had a friend, a journalist, she's still my friend, Delia O'Hara, and she had written an article about two dancers, Stone and Cameron, who had the most popular and most important dance school in Chicago, ballet school, in the 1940s. And, of course, they went to St. James. And they had, Delia had written an article about them. And there was a person at St. James, very important in the 1980s and 90s, Betsy Davis. And Betsy and Brooks Davis were part of the important little group or committee that was working on the book project. And Betsy knew about Cameron and Stone because she had been a dancer, she had been involved with Ruth Page, and she had been an important collector of dance materials for the Newberry Library that has one of the most exceptional collections of dance archives. And of course, Cameron and Stone is part of that, and it includes material about St. James, by the way. So, another place to go and find out about yourselves. So they asked Delia, who had done this article a couple of years before, would you write a book for us? And Delia, who knew me and knew I was finishing up my dissertation, began calling me up and asking me about the different people who had founded St. James. They were people I knew all about. At least I knew about their economics, I knew about their politics, I didn't know about their religion. And I said after about 3 calls, for God's sakes, I should write the book, not you. So she said, you know, you're right. She had a job. She was writing for the Chicago Tribune. She told Dean Charles Green, at the Cathedral about me, and he told the committee, and they interviewed me, and they asked me to write a proposal. Well, I had so much information about the people who were here that I had the boldness and arrogance to think I could write a book in 1 year about everything else, the cultural, social, and religious part of their lives at St. James. And so I wrote a proposal, and the proposal was accepted, and both on my part and their part, there was risk, because after all, I hadn't published anything yet, just written a dissertation, and they were willing to take a chance. I remember Dean Green saying, well, you know, it's all right that you're Jewish, as long as you're not against religion. And he said, you're not against religion, are you? And I said, no, I'm not against religion. So I got the contract, and he said, 1 year to deliver. And believe me, he held me to the fire. About 2 months before the date of the delivery, the due date, I got a little note from him, and it was very, very curt and to the point. We are expecting the manuscript on X date. And Dean Charles Green was a very friendly and very warm man, but he was also very strict about getting contracts finished. So there we were, and I wrote that, and it forced me to learn how to use a computer and get that book done. I think that told me a lot about the kind of people that were at St. James. The second story was before I agreed to sign the contract for the book, and should I tell you how much I got paid? Do you want to know what they gave me? What my fee was? $10,000. I, as a younger person, and just finishing my dissertation, it sounded like a lot of money to me. Okay. This was 1984-85. But before I signed up, Dean Green said, you know, you better come to Evensong and join us and kind of see if you could fit in here. You know, I mean, could you stand to be working with us? What do you think? So my husband and I, sitting here, Richard, we went to Evensong. And I want to tell you about what I want to call cosmopolitanism and diversity, inclusion, and a sense of almost, it was okay to be different, you could fit in here. That was the mood when we approached the church. The first thing that I noticed was that the person who was the chief usher that evening for Evensong was a young man in a fabulous mohawk hairdo with a whole string of earrings all the way down his ear and a kind of flamboyant outfit. And he came up to me and he gave the two of us our service program, whatever, and ushered us in to the church sanctuary, which was very plain and kind of shabby and all white. You know, nothing like it looks today. And the whole place was kind of a little shabby. You know, the outside, the limestone edifice was sort of crumbling. You know, looked like it needed roof work. Things were not, you know, shipshape. And yet the people were friendly. They were very it was an unusual eclectic group of people. The kind of conventional people you would assume you would meet in a church, and people who were different. And everybody seemed to be okay with it. And I said to myself, I can be here. I can work with these people. So that was the next thing I found. And then I want to talk about my last story, because I don't know if I'm running out of time. My last story is about faith. Okay, so this was not a project just about a book. This was a restoration project, restoring the original building, opening up the sanctuary, connecting the art of the past with the present, bringing the traditions back in a way that material culture could open people up to what had been the living religion of the people here. And one day when the construction or reconstruction of the sanctuary was at its deepest level, when scaffolding had taken entirely the sanctuary, and when the floor itself had been taken up, a group of us, headed by Bishop Montgomery and his suffragan bishop, Quentin Primo, the first African-American bishop in Chicago, and the committee and myself went up the stairs to the guild room. We couldn't walk in the sanctuary because it was undone. But we walked into the stairs, and these stairs were, I think if they're still like this, kind of hard to.
They are.
All right, it was and we were almost in single file. And we're walking, and as we're walking, we can see the tower, the interior of the tower, the stones that have the scars of the 1871 Great Chicago Fire. The scars are there. I could touch them. I felt emotional. Here I was touching the very thing that had lasted out the fire and was part of the restoration that had been finished by 1875, which we are now beginning a great celebration of. And as we were walking, suddenly Bishop Primo broke into song. We are climbing Jacob's ladder, children of the Lord. And I said, well, this is what's keeping the passion going of this restoration, because when we looked out from the guild room, the place was just totally up just undone, to be redone, to be restored. And so that has been one of my greatest memories, treasured memories of working on this project. And I was so glad that when R.R. Donnelly agreed to do the book, they were willing to put in fabulous color reproductions of the interior space as it was restored, which is a great thing to have in the book, as well as all of the photographs. And I have to talk about my editor, just a brief word. Bishop Montgomery wanted me to stay on, and Dean Green wanted me to stay on as well. And he called me and he said, now that we have the manuscript, we have to turn it into a book. And he said, because R.R. Donnelly will publish it, but they cannot do any copy editing or any kind of activity surrounding getting it ready for publication. They don't have editorial resources. So you have to give it to them camera ready, so to speak. Yeah. So Dean Green said to me, we have a parishioner, Janet Elliott. He said, you're either going to get along with her fabulously, or you're going to not get along with her at all. but he said, she has tremendous knowledge of editorial work, and she will guide you through this, and we will have a book. Okay, I met Janet Elliott. She was a force unto herself, and you had to handle her just the right way, and we became good friends. And, well, she almost became an Auntie Mame to my children. She really did become an Auntie Mame to my children, and I miss her. She died, I think, too young, but anyway, she helped me. She taught me everything about making book, not book that you get. gamble, but making a book. I learned how to make captions. I did historical research on photographs. She taught me how to do an index the old-fashioned way. It's a good index. And all the things that we did, we designed the book. Everything in it was a decision that Janet and I made. So the typeset and the way in which the chapters begin and how everything is laid out, we did it all. And then it was published or printed by Donnelly. So that was a great experience. And again, someone here with great talent and vision came to help me, and the book was an interactive project. It could not have been done without me living along with the congregation, getting to know people, talking, meeting, going to worship services, being taken by Dean Green and Bishop Montgomery through the liturgy and all of the ins and outs of what was going on at the altar space as well. And there are so many other stories I could tell. But anyway, maybe we have time for questions and answers.
If you've been to St. James and you've not seen this book, it's surprising. Because it's kind of, you find it sort of sitting in various places, but we have this accessible, and I think what we need to do is probably have a couple exhibition copies of this, if you promise not to take them, so that you will be able to have reference for those as you come in and look at this. But this has been our, excuse me, I don't mean to be sacrilegious, this has been our Bible while we've been working on this project. So you'll actually see a lot of the same pictures that you'll see that we printed on the walls here, and the way that they were, the story that was told. So I'd like to open up to questions at this point. Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Schultz. My name is Hak Wong. I have been a member of the Cathedral since 1981, so it's preordained that I should be here this morning to bear testament to what you just told us, because I have a day off from the choir today. So I've been a choir member and as well as a parishioner here since 1981, and I can bear testimony again to what you just described, the old St. James Cathedral in the 1980s, as well as the new post-remodeling St. James Cathedral. And yes, you described perfectly the setting of the evensong, the people there, and all that. Yeah, thank you very, very much for coming today. Thank you. And I'm here to answer any question. Also from people who may not have been here, because I don't think that many people have been here in 1980. 1980? No? Yeah.
Yes.
I just want to know, did Abraham Lincoln actually come here to go to the church?
That's the apocryphal information. We don't have a photograph of him, and we looked. We went to New, and I says, do we have any picture of Abraham Lincoln actually worshiping here? But he actually, it says in Rima's book and in the Massey book that he actually worshipped here after he received the nomination and was sitting in the Arnold pew. Arnold was one of his very good friends, and he came to the church to worship with him after receiving the nomination. So
Arnold was more than his good friend. Arnold was his really political campaign manager in the local area, and really wrote a kind of political biography of it. He was really instrumental in crafting the Lincoln image in the beginning. Isaac Newton Arnold was an important, was an important parishioner here, but he was an important cultural and political figure in Chicago. He said to the Chicago people, if we're just mere traders if we don't have a good historical society, if we don't have culture, we'll just be considered just, people who sell things, and we don't wanna just be that. So he had this vision of a kind of cultural world that had to be created here, as well as the commercial world. And he linked the political with the cultural and economic world.
And that's the beauty of Rima's book. She does such an incredible job of moving just beyond the religious institution of St. James to how this is a cultural institution as well.
I'm wondering what you believe the actions we as individuals and a community might engage in this time of political unrest and uncertainty that will keep this community alive and thriving.
That is probably the most important question to ask today. I'm going to go back to something that I asked Bishop Montgomery, because he became bishop during the Northern Civil Rights movement's greatest agitation in Chicago surrounding the issue of open housing, and the first real assault on the segregation of residential housing in the city, which was the basis of so much of the racism and tension that existed here. And that was when Martin Luther King Jr. came, and I asked Bishop Montgomery, who participated in a conference of religious and political leaders, including Mayor Daley, that actually had some meetings here in the Diocesan Center, actually, which was before this building. Although I don't know if this building had actually been constructed quite yet, but the meetings that existed were attempts at a manifesto that was going to be an agreement to change the policies regarding housing in Chicago. It was an attempt, and it was a time of tremendous tension. And I said to Bishop Montgomery, who had described to me how he had walked in the streets in his activities with what was called the Night Ministry that existed. It was a coalition of ministers, religious leaders who were trying to deal on an evening or daily basis with the kinds of conflicts that were happening in Chicago in the neighborhoods. And I said, how did you know to do it? How did you do it? And he said that he was compelled to take action at that time, and he did not feel he had a choice. And I think that those people who feel strong enough physically to withstand the assault that ICE makes on protesters have to be there and show themselves physically at any and every time that there is an opportunity. And that's just about it. We have to be there in real life. As Montgomery had said to me, I didn't have a choice. I didn't even think I had a choice. I had to walk in the streets, and I had to find ways to deal with the conflict. I say that all of us have an obligation now in this direction, and St. James was part of the attempt to make a solution, a possibility of solution in the 60s. I think that a lot of work has been done over the years at different times. I think the pulpit itself is a wonderful platform and should be used. And I applaud those who are willing and able to do it, and hope that we outnumber those who sit back and say, well, what can I do?
This is our history. This is our history. We cannot let it go. We need to keep building on that tradition. So thank you for that encouragement, Rima. Absolutely. We have one other question, and then we're going to go.
Yeah, it's more about the book. But where'd you go for your primary resources in getting information for the book?
I must say that the people at St. James were part of that literate, educated group of people who understood the value of writing and saving their history as they were living it. I think that's important, and we should continue doing it. And I think with the electronic age, we've gotten very lazy. And don't get lazy, because if you don't save it, no historian can come around and find it later on. It's dead. So, just to give an example, Ryerson, of Ryerson Steel, one of the great industrialists of this era, was a St. James person. And
Big name.
okay, big name. And Ryerson, and he had a lot of relationship with the national government as well. Ryerson, when the fire happened, the first Ryerson, I think he was the Joseph Ryerson.
Yes, I think so.
And I went into every archive in the area, as well as the kind of material that was available through St. James. But what was available at St. James, in part, occurred because the people who experienced the fire immediately sat down and put to paper and pen their recollections. Ryerson, who was an industrialist, I mean, he was not a writer, he was not a scholar, he sat down and he wrote an incredible description of the church that was in October 5th in 1871. Beautiful. And he explained every little nook and cranny, the colors. Don't think that men are not interested in the interior space. There's no such thing as domesticity versus the public. It's
Absolutely.
all right. Gender is so much more complicated. This very rigorous industrialist, this competitive capitalist, went and sat down and wrote it all down. And when I found his recollections at the Chicago History Museum, what was then called the Chicago Historical Society, he was one of the people, the businessmen I had studied. And now I was reading again this part of his collection of papers. And I must say that not only did they make sure that everyone knew what it had looked like, and this was before camera, so forth, but the membership, the ledgers were pieced together. So there is an old initial ledger of the people who were members here, people who were members at Trinity Church and at Grace. These were the three essentially important churches of the Episcopal Diocese at this period before the fire. And so it goes back into the 1840s, 1830s, and begins to give the household names. Who was a member? This was incredible. Some of those registers must have been destroyed, and they immediately sat down and wrote down what they could remember. And they understood the necessity, because you see, your records are legal records. One of the things that used to happen when I was here all the time is that people would call the registrar. It's very important. they would need, for example, some identification of their birth date, or that they didn't have a birth certificate or something, that they could use something in the parochial records of the church, and these were held in court as real records, real legal records, and they could get Social Security, for example, as a result of being able to identify their age and their citizenship and whatnot because of their membership in the church. So the records have a critical importance canonically, legally, historically, for all of us. The committee gathered as much as they could, and as I became more familiar and actually began to spend time developing the archives into a more, as I said to Bishop Montgomery when he first gave me the combination to the vault, I ran up to him and I was very informal, and I said, Bishop Montgomery, I can't do it, you can't hire me. And he said, why not? I said, I can't, it's such a mess, I can't write a footnote. And he said, well, come down and see. And he looked at it, and I said, and I don't know how to touch anything, because these are sacred things. These are the garments of priests. These are ritual objects. And he laughed, and he looked up more or less to God, I guess, providentially, and he said, you sent me someone who knows something about holy. And he said the Hebrew, kadosh, 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 because I knew from my background that a book that had been used in a worship service had to be treated differently. And I wanted to know how to treat the things here. And he was, so this is all very important.
Bless you for what you have shared with us both today and in your book. Thank you all for coming, and I hope you'll take time many times to walk through the history of St. James.